He flayed men alive and forced their families to watch. He drowned Babylon to avenge his murdered son, rerouting a river to erase the city from history, only to be murdered not by enemies, but by the hands of his other sons. This was the first time in Assyrian history that a mighty king fell not by foreign swords, but by the hands of his own blood. His death shook the whole Assyrian Empire like an earthquake. No one expected Sennacherib, whose very name once made kings tremble, to die so violently, at least not by betrayal. That wasn't even the only impact of his death. A few decades after his death, his name became a curse. It was declared forbidden for anyone, even commoners, to name their sons Sennacherib. A name that once struck fear across nations was now spat out with shame. But bloody endings don't just appear out of nowhere. They always have a beginning, and Sennacherib's reign began with a shadow. From the very start, his reign was marked by ambition, bloodshed, and the hunger to be remembered as the king of the world. In 705 BCE, his father, King Sargon II, was killed in battle against rebels in the hills of Anatolia, and his body was never found. To the Assyrians, this was a disaster. Sargon's death was more than a military defeat. It was a bad omen. Many believed that Sargon must have angered the gods to die so shamefully. So when Sennacherib became the king of Assyria at the age of 32, he didn't just inherit the throne, he inherited a curse also. And the dark omen of Sargon's death haunted Sennacherib's first days as king. Sennacherib feared that his father's curse would cling to him, so he abandoned Sargon's brand new capital, Dur-Sharrukin, and quickly moved the royal court to Nineveh, where he established a new Assyrian order. This wasn't just a political move, it was his own way of cutting ties with his father's tainted legacy. In fact, Sennacherib avoided even speaking Sargon's name in inscriptions, as if erasing his name from the books could erase the curse. But even with all these measures he took, he was still anxious. He still feared that his father's restless spirit might rise against him. So, he rebuilt the temple of Nergal, the god of the underworld, also known as the god of war and death, an offering to the gods to keep Sargon's ghost at peace. This was only the beginning of Sennacherib's story. His crown had barely rested on his head before a new trouble sparked. Rebellions broke out across the empire, and enemies rushed to test the strength of the new king. They believed that Sargon's death would have weakened the Assyrian Empire, and the new king would be vulnerable. Sennacherib and his army had marched north into Anatolia to punish the Tabal people who had killed his father. But while he was away, an even greater threat rose in the south, in Babylonia. At this time, Babylon was a vassal state under the Assyrians' empire, and Sennacherib had not only inherited Assyrian throne, but also his father's southern title as the king of Babylon. But the Babylonians were proud people. They hated the idea of being ruled by the Assyrians, and Sennacherib only made things worse. Now, Babylon had a sacred tradition. Every new king of Babylon must take the hand of Marduk, their chief god. But Sennacherib refused to participate in this tradition. Instead, he just declared himself as king of Babylon, ignoring their rituals. The Babylonians saw this act as a blasphemy to their gods. They became very angry and rebelled against the Assyrians. The leaders of Babylon rallied around a Chaldean prince named Marduk-apla-iddni also, called Merodach-Baladan. He seized the throne of Babylon and restored himself as king of Babylon with powerful support from the Elamite kingdom to the east. And for months, Marduk-apla-idna's revolt in Babylonia went unchallenged because Sennacherib held back. His army was already at war, and he didn't want to fight two wars at once. But by 703 BCE, the waiting was over. Sennacherib marched south, determined to show the Babylonians the kind of king he was. But to his utter shock, he was defeated in battle. The Babylonian Elamite coalition met him head-on near Kish and crushed his forces. For a moment, it seemed the gods were against him again, just as they had been against his father. But Sennacherib was not the kind of king that accepted defeat. He regrouped, studied the cracks in his enemy's fragile alliance, and struck with precision more than before. One by one, he tore their forces apart, breaking their unity and crushing them. At last, he advanced on Babylon itself. When the people saw what was coming for them, they swung open their city gates and surrendered without resistance. Then, Sennacherib placed a puppet ruler in Babylon. The battle was over. The rebellion had been crushed, or so he thought. Sennacherib's victory was short-lived. Babylon's defiance had already sent a dangerous message that Assyria's grip could now be challenged. So, across the empire, whispers of rebellion had spread like wildfire. In every corner of the empire, from Anatolia to Babylonia to the Levant, cities rose against him. And just in his first years as king, Sennacherib was already drenched in war. These constant wars made the king come to a new resolve. He forged brutal policies of terror to maintain control over his restless empire. He turned terror into state policy, and from that moment, he kept his empire in fear and submission. Every city got a taste of Sennacherib's rule of terror, but no city suffered more under that terror than Babylon itself. Well, Babylon wasn't like every other city. It was a thorn in Sennacherib's side. The Babylonians rose against him again and again for many years. In one of those revolts in Babylon, his own firstborn son, Ashur-nadin-shumi, the viceroy he had placed on Babylon's throne, was captured by the rebels and killed. That was the breaking point for Sennacherib. In 689 BCE, he unleashed his fury on Babylonia, and the city was completely destroyed. His armies besieged the city of Babylon for 9 months. When the walls of the city finally fell, he dealt with the people with no mercy. His men looted everything of value. They demolished the temples, tore down the palaces, and even homes were burned until the city was reduced to rubble. And then, in an act meant to erase Babylon from history, he rerouted the Euphrates River to flow through the ruins, drowning Babylon under its own waters and washing away whatever was left. Sennacherib left a huge impact on the history of Babylon. For more than 10 years afterwards, Babylon remained silent, abandoned, kingless, its people gone. Babylonian texts mournfully call this period the kingless era. The Mesopotamians called this act unthinkable. They said that by destroying Babylon, Sennacherib had offended the gods. Years later, Sennacherib's violent death was believed to be a divine punishment for this very crime. However, the ruins of Babylon stood as a warning to other cities. Every city in Assyria's empire knew rebellion meant annihilation. In history, this very act against Babylon is seen as the peak of Sennacherib's reputation for brutality. But Sennacherib's brutality didn't end at Babylon. In fact, it was only the beginning. Across his empire, Sennacherib turned mass deportations and massacre into state policy. he would order that an entire population of people should be uprooted and scattered across Assyria. This was his own method of preventing future uprisings. He bragged that in Levant alone he captured 46 fortified cities of Judah, deporting 200,150 people as war booty. Even if the numbers may have been inflated for propaganda, the terror they inspired was real. Families and even hundreds of thousands of the population were forced into exile, broken and displaced. And when people resisted openly, they were punished brutally for all to see. And then, in 701 BCE, his terror reached Judah. Of all his campaigns, he is most remembered for his invasion of the kingdom of Judah in 701 BCE. It was one of his proudest campaigns. In the Levant of the West, one kingdom after another stopped obeying Assyria, cities like Tyre and Sidon. And most important of all, Judah, ruled by King Hezekiah. Hezekiah stopped paying tribute to Assyria. He joined an anti-Assyrian coalition by allying with Egypt, which at that time was ruled by the Cushite dynasty, to rebel against Sennacherib. For Sennacherib, this was an open rebellion, and rebellion could only be answered in the way he knew how to best, with terror. So he marched west, down the Mediterranean coast, with a massive army, cutting down every city in his path. The Philistine strongholds that supported Judah fell first. At Ashkelon, the Assyrians stormed the city and carried off its king in chains. At Ekron, the rebel leaders who had overthrown Assyria's vassal ruler were punished, while the city itself was left devastated. When he was done, he turned toward Judah, and as he marched toward Judah, his forces kept ravaging every town they came across. In his records, he bragged that he conquered all the fortified cities of Judah, stating the number was 46. Then he arrived at Lachish, Judah's second largest city. There, the Assyrians built a giant siege ramp. They smashed through the walls of Lachish and poured into the city like a flood. Lachish fell into the hands of the Assyrians, and the end of the city was so terrible that it was depicted by Assyrian artwork on the palace walls of Nineveh. In the artwork, Sennacherib was shown sitting on his throne, watching as the spoils of Lachish, its treasures, its people, its defeated leaders, were paraded before him. 2 rebel commanders were flayed alive before their families. This was a clear warning meant for Jerusalem and the rest of Judah. After Lachish, the Assyrian army advanced to the gates of Judah's capital, Jerusalem. King Hezekiah locked himself within the walls of Jerusalem. Sennacherib and his army surrounded Jerusalem, and Sennacherib boasted in his annals that he had shut up Hezekiah in his royal city like a bird in a cage. Jerusalem seemed doomed, and yet the city did not fall. The siege ended mysteriously. Assyrian records are silent on the outcome of Jerusalem's capture. The Hebrew Bible states that an angel struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night, forcing the king and his army to retreat. This event was recorded in the book of Isaiah. The Greek historian Herodotus tells a stranger tale. He says that a swarm of field mice gnawed through the Assyrians' bowstrings and provisions, leaving them defenseless. So they had to retreat suddenly. Modern historians suspect something less miraculous, perhaps disease in the camp, or trouble with supplies, or even a diversion from the Egyptian Cushite army. Whatever the cause, the truth remains that in 701 BCE, Sennacherib abandoned the siege of Jerusalem. Jerusalem wasn't destroyed. However, Hezekiah was terrified by the outcome of this siege, so he sued for peace. He stripped the gold from the temple of Jerusalem itself to pay a crushing tribute that Sennacherib imposed on him. He gave up Judah's land, enormous quantities of wealth in gold and silver. He even gave up his independence as king and was reduced to nothing more than a client king under Assyrian rule. For Sennacherib, the campaign was still a triumph. Even though Jerusalem was spared, he knew that it survived at a terrible cost. So, the king of Assyria returned to Nineveh with spoils, captives, and his power reestablished, leaving behind a trail of smoke and silence across the land of Judah. Judah was humiliated. City to city, Sennacherib was known and feared as the king of terror. He left a trail of fear in every city. But in the city of Nineveh, Sennacherib was not only known as a destroyer, but as a builder. He dreamed of leaving a mark that would outlive every battle he had won. So, after his great military campaigns, he turned his eyes to grand building projects. Already we know that one of Sennacherib's very first bold decisions was moving the empire's capital to Nineveh. And Nineveh, under his reign, changed forever. He transformed the city into a magnificent imperial city. Sennacherib vastly expanded the size of Nineveh. He built massive double walls around the city. The walls were so massive they stretched almost 12 kilometers in circumference. Even today, parts of those walls still rise from the earth as witnesses of his legacy. But walls alone weren't enough to achieve the dreams Sennacherib had in mind, so he continued building. He built a palace so vast, so dazzling, that he named it the Palace Without Rival. And he wasn't exaggerating. Archaeologists later found this place, and it had more than 70 rooms. Their walls were carved with endless stories of his victories, and the most famous of these palace reliefs was the brutal siege of Lachish. But even still, the king's vision was beyond palaces, so he kept on building. He filled Nineveh with temples, gardens, and other infrastructures. He renovated temples and even built new ones for the gods, giving the city spiritual weight as Assyria's supreme capital. He even improved the system of water supply in the city. He dug canals through the land and raised a stone aqueduct at Jerwin, bringing fresh water from faraway mountains into the heart of his city. And this water also brought beauty to the city. Sennacherib planted lush parks and royal gardens, not only in Nineveh, but even in the old capital, Ashur. Later, writers wrote that these might have been the true hanging gardens, the wonder of the world, thus suggesting that the legendary gardens of Babylon might have been at Nineveh under his reign. Whether that legend is true or not, one thing is certain: his building works were unmatched. Records tell us he personally oversaw these building projects himself, commanding workers and materials from every corner of the empire. He was not only a destroyer, but a builder king. By the time he was done, Nineveh stood as the crown jewel of Assyria, the grandest city of the age, a monument to Sennacherib's power and vision. From here, we thought Sennacherib would finally enjoy his reign. Since he had built a city that was meant to last forever, his throne seemed secure, and his empire was unshakable. But then, fate intervened. In the cold month of Tebetu, our January, 681 BCE, the great king's story took a deadly turn. Inside the walls of Nineveh, betrayal was already brewing in the halls. Sennacherib, the mighty king of Assyria, was struck down. He was not slain by foreign enemies, nor by rebels in battle. He was killed by his own sons. That very day, Nineveh's walls witnessed a crime that stunned the ancient world. Not so many Assyrian kings ever met such an end, and Sennacherib was the only one murdered by his own blood. The mastermind of this murder was Ardamulisu, an embittered prince who was once expected to be heir. Consumed by rage at being passed over for his younger brother Esarhaddon, he became resentful and wouldn't forgive his father. So he plotted against his father with a younger brother, Nabushar-Usur, and a band of loyal conspirators. They planned and planned, waiting for the perfect moment to execute. The moment finally came when Esarhaddon, the chosen heir, was sent away far from Nineveh. And on that day, with the true heir absent, the princes struck. In a shocking twist, the mighty emperor of Assyria was stabbed to death not by enemies on the battlefield, but by his own flesh and blood inside his own stronghold. The Hebrew Bible tells us that Sennacherib was deep in prayer within the temple of his god, Nisroch, when the silence of worship was shattered by the knives of his own sons. Thus fell the king of terror, the mighty conqueror of nations, the builder of Nineveh, the scourge of Judah and Babylon, struck down not by armies or kings, but by the very blood of his house. And as a result of this unexpected murder, Assyria was thrown into chaos. Nineveh shook under the weight of the death of their king. Ardamulisu thought he had won. He rushed to claim the throne, believing the crown would be his at last. But the court was horrified by such bloodshed he had committed. Many nobles, generals, and officials refused to bow to a man who had murdered his own father. So many remained loyal to Esarhaddon, the rightful heir. And within just weeks, the tide turned. Esarhaddon raised his army and marched swiftly toward Nineveh to avenge his father. Ardamulisu's courage failed when he heard this. Ardamulisu and his allies did not wait to face Esarhaddon. They fled into exile, seeking refuge in the northern kingdom of Urartu, known in the Bible as Ararat, meaning sanctuary. By the spring of 680 BCE, Esarhaddon entered Nineveh and claimed the throne exactly as Sennacherib had intended, without a single challenger to stand in his way. And so, the bloody end of Sennacherib achieved nothing for the murderers. Their daggers removed the king, but they could not win the crown. And for Assyria's enemies, Sennacherib's death seemed like divine justice. The proud king who drowned Babylon and terrorized nations met his doom at the hands of his own sons. And it is here, at the moment of his bloody fall, that we truly understand the legacy that Sennacherib left behind. For 24 years, Sennacherib ruled with unmatched power in the ancient Near East. He was the most powerful ruler of his time, dominating Mesopotamia, crushing rebellions in the Levant, and punishing anyone who defied Assyria. He did not expand the empire greatly, but he made sure no one could threaten it. He rebuilt Nineveh into a wonder of the ancient world. Later generations would still call him a builder king, a man whose vision shaped the heart of Assyria. But the shadow of his reign was just as unforgettable. He ruled by fear. Cities that resisted him were burned, their leaders tortured, their people slain or enslaved, and nothing stained his memory more than his destruction of Babylon. He leveled the holy city to the ground, scattering its gods, thereby sinning against the land, a sin his son had to atone for. Esarhaddon, on taking the throne, hurried to rebuild Babylon, restoring its temples and idols, seeking to calm the fury his father's actions had ignited. Sennacherib's name carried both awe and fear. But above all, many people remembered not just how he ruled, but how he fell, not in battle, not by foreign armies, but at the hands of his own sons. To the Hebrews, to the Babylonians, and every nation that had once trembled before him, his death was seen as divine justice, a punishment for his arrogance, a repayment for his cruelty. Even within Assyria, his bloody end left scars of instability in the royal house. Later, kings guarded their succession carefully, invoking the favor of the god to avoid a similar fate. They learned that fear can only rule an empire for so long. So in the end, Sennacherib's story is one of brilliance and brutality. A ruler who built wonders and spread terror. A king who believed no one could touch him until betrayal came from his own house. His reign ended in blood and betrayal. His name lived on in fear, and his legacy became a dramatic chapter in the history of the ancient Near East.